My dream job at Yahoo, the layoff, the non-disclosure agreement, and what it actually cost. There's something you don't always realize in the moment. You don't always know you're standing inside the beginning of something historic. Most of the time, you can only understand it years later, when the dust settles, when the mythology fades, and you realize, yeah, I was right there in the middle of it. That's how I think about my early years at Yahoo. Specifically, Yahoo and Deep Ellum in Dallas. By the time I arrived in 2006, the glory days of Broadcast.com were already over. The sale had happened years earlier. Mark Cuban had secured his place in business lore. The headlines moved on, but the infrastructure, that was still there. Satellite dishes pointed towards NASA TV, NHL feeds, and overseas news channels. Old Broadcast.com hardware was still running in the background, some of it literally held together with duct tape. It didn't feel like a sleek tech campus. It felt like a digital museum that never quite shut down. Here's something people forget. Streaming didn't technically begin in Silicon Valley campuses with reclaimed wood and cold brew on tap. It began in converted warehouses in downtown Dallas. Cracked concrete floors, questionable wiring, cigarette smoke soaked into the walls, and parking lots that doubled as crime scenes. I once heard of a coworker who walked inside of a restaurant for tacos and came back out to an empty space where his truck used to be. Grand Theft Auto, baby. That's what Deep Ellum was in the mid-2000s. And that is where modern streaming was born. Before the crash, life inside of a major internet company felt secure, comfortable, and predictable. Twin 60-inch plasma screens in the lunchroom? Check. Free snacks, juice, fruit, and Starbucks coffee in the snack room? Check. Foosball tables? Coworkers with wild stories and non-disclosure agreements? I had just completed some pretty expensive Apple training for Final Cut Pro, and I was settling in for what I thought would be a quiet summer. NCAA women's softball archives, NASCAR press conferences, and Disney electronic press kits. It felt like Easy Street until it wasn't. One afternoon, I walked into the office with my sack lunch and my designer messenger bag, and my manager was waiting at the front door with security. "Can you come with us, please?" No explanation, no preamble, just walked to an unmarked conference room outside of the secured area. Human Resources was already there. The language was clean, corporate, and impersonal. Your position has been eliminated. Career transition, future endeavors, blah, blah, blah. And just like that, I was an unemployment statistic. Scenes like this play out millions of times in America. Mine just happened to come with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. I wasn't supposed to trash talk Yahoo in the media or anywhere else, at least until after I got my final severance payment later that July. That NDA has long since expired. I mean, Yahoo doesn't even exist anymore in the same corporate format it did previously, which is why I can talk about this now. At Yahoo, my title initially was Broadcast Engineer 3. In practice, that meant living inside the guts of the operation. Freezing server rooms where you needed a winter coat in July, equipment racks, and dark rooms where machines screamed and fans fought the heat. We streamed live sports and press conferences and NASA TV using Windows Media Encoder on PCs that sounded like leaf blowers. Encoding was totally manual. Troubleshooting meant sprinting between our cubicles and the satellite receivers in the server room, with instinct and luck. Millions of people watched those streams, and somehow we pulled it off. The cast of characters there would have stepped right into any HBO parody like Silicon Valley. Confident chaos merchants, quiet terminal wizards, and managers asking questions no one could answer. And then there was me, the guy who got hired because the Yahoo managers loved Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. Apparently, if you could run a Comrex remote in the rain for the hardline without panicking, you were qualified to help run a digital media empire. There was already a former Ticket remote technician on staff at Yahoo, which I feel definitely boosted my perceived value at the time. His name was Steve Porcari. I looked up to him when I was a promo guy at The Ticket back in 1999. I watched him do the job and talked to him about how he got the job. I knew he was a guitar and band guy, and we had similar skill sets, and I figured that I could probably, with some training, do the same job he was doing, which I ultimately did when he moved on to Broadcast.com and Yahoo later. So when I followed a similar path and went to Yahoo, it didn't feel random. We barely knew each other and might have spoken one time after I started working there. But I had my foot in the door, and that's all that mattered to me. 2 years in, I realized something important. Engineering would make me comfortable, but not portable. The future wasn't in hardware, it was in content production. The engineering staff were the best coworkers I ever had at Yahoo. There was Sean, our boss, Hugh, Dustin, rest in peace, JR, Jens, Rodney, Brian, and Dayton. Solid dudes. People you'd actually want to go have a beer with. Special shout out to Matt Smith. Matt was the first guy that I interviewed with, my first point of contact at Yahoo, and he was the whole reason I was even sitting there. Now, the content production side, where I would eventually transfer, felt like a very different culture. Not welcoming, knowledge was guarded, patience was thin, and asking those guys for help felt like an inconvenience. I was already a broadcast engineer, but digitally I was coming from the analog radio and TV world. Beta SP decks at UNT, linear editing. I'd done basic non-linear editing, cutting together my wedding video. I knew digital photography workflows, but Yahoo content production was on another level, and the manager did not like me. And the feeling eventually became mutual. He was the one who coldly escorted me out during the layoff, hovering over my desk while I packed, cold, impatient. Hurry up and get your shit and get out. That moment crystallized everything. I was never going to belong there. The transition itself was brutal. From linear editing on tape to Final Cut Pro on a Mac Pro, I had to learn a whole new workflow and a whole new language. Physical tapes were still arriving, and the renders on Apple took forever during that time. We encoded in multiple bit rates and multiple languages, cutting together TV spots and movie trailers. Crashes back then were constant. The deadlines were real, but editing wasn't the hard part. It was the rendering. We'd often leave machines running overnight, rendering just to hit a deadline. I hated it at the time, just because of the vibes of the guys I worked with. They were totally different from the engineering staff. But it was one of the best professional decisions I ever made. I knew if I didn't evolve right then, I'd wash out of the media business completely. I think of that transfer like a relationship that you know is doomed. You know it's going to go down in flames eventually, but you still want to learn everything you can from that situationship before it does. So I went to Apple Final Cut training on the company dime like 2 weeks before I got laid off. Friends with benefits, indeed. Yahoo is definitely a situationship, fleeting at best. I knew my time at Yahoo was limited. The layoffs never really stopped the entire time I was there from 06 to 09. The economy was crashing. And let's be honest, that era of Yahoo was filled with mismanagement, missteps, and an entire identity crisis for the company. From top internet destination to punchline in under a decade. It was hard to watch. My stock options looked great on paper the day I signed in 2006, but by the time I was laid off in 2009, they were completely worthless. The hours caught up with me eventually. The commute also caught up with me. I was driving about 120 miles a day to work for Yahoo. My marriage was unraveling. My personal life was taking on serious damage. So I did what you're supposed to do. I said something. I sat down with management and explained that things were falling apart at home. Not theatrically, not as an excuse, but as context. Yahoo's culture loved toughness. Profanity flew freely in meetings. F-bombs were aesthetic. But when I spoke honestly, the tone changed. Calm down, they said. And then came the line I'll never forget. You knew what you were signing up for, so suck it up. No curiosity, no follow-up, no humanity. Just a reminder. The machine does not slow down for personal collapse. They asked what I ultimately wanted to do. Okay, fair enough. I'm a radio, TV, and film guy. I'm a photographer. I'm an artist. I'm a voiceover guy. So I'm going to do editorial work, on-air roles, and voice acting. Content creation. Their answer was blunt. You'll never do that here. And I was like, okay, thanks. It was meant as clarity. And in a way, it was. That meeting stripped away any illusion I had left about the managers I thought that I had admired, or any illusion I had about Yahoo as a whole. Creativity was a liability, stability was irrelevant, and adaptability only mattered if it served the system. I lasted for a few more weeks at best after that. On the side, though, I started freelancing. I could see the layoff coming in early 2009, so I went on LegalZoom.com and formed an LLC. I got a credit line, bought HD cameras I couldn't afford, built an editing rig on Apple that I absolutely should not have put on credit. I traveled around to location shoots that I definitely could not afford. And that's how it worked then. You needed gear. You couldn't just create cinematic content on a BlackBerry in 2009. Everything I do professionally today traces back to that moment. You can't talk about broadcast.com without talking about paper millionaires. Young engineers worth 7 figures on paper overnight. Escalades, Land Rovers, Ducatis, ridiculous home stereo systems, loft apartments in Deep Ellum. Then the tax bills arrived. People selling cars and homes just to pay the IRS. Mark Cuban hedged every last share. He didn't just get rich. He engineered permanence. Everyone else learned the hard way and went down with the ship. When Yahoo finally did hit that iceberg, I walked out with a severance package and perspective. I returned to my roots. Creativity, culture, community. I rebuilt. That's what a Gen X pivot looks like. You don't stay down. You evolve. You remember who you were before that corporate badge defined you. The day after my layoff, I bought tickets to Bonnaroo. 12 days from Dallas to Nashville to New York City, Atlanta, and back. That road trip did more for my career than any corporate training ever did. 17 years later, the Yahoo building in Richardson is basically empty. The logo's still there. The satellite dishes are still up there, but nobody's home. I'm still producing digital content, zero regrets. And yeah, it was Yahoo's hush money that funded the beginning of the business that still feeds me today. If you're in your own iceberg moment right now, hear this. You're not finished. You're in between chapters. I'm George Tenike. This is Confessions of a Gen X Mind. If you like what you heard, check out all of our episodes on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get podcasts. Also dig in a little bit deeper for the essay companions to all of these episodes, confessionsofagenxmind.substack.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you down the road.